start now.
Well, without having to like look around like that. Yeah.
Welcome everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
It's great to see you all here in the afternoon session. I'm going to sit there.
Oh, yeah.
Great.
So,
We're going to start now. Okay, great. It's glad to see you all so energetic after lunch. And we've got a great panel here. And I just want to start by again underlining that today, Monday, is the beginning of Carers Week 2023, which is an annual campaign to celebrate the vital contribution of carers in the UK. So I think we should have a round of applause for that. All those carers out there. So we've got a panel here that are highly experienced in the issue of care. First of all, we've got Luke Tanner. You can put up your hand if you like, Luke. And Luke Tanner is a psychotherapist and a trainer and consultant in culture change and relationship-centered care. And at the moment, he's starting the London Circle of the Equal Care Co-op, which is a new experiment in care provision. And also from the Equal Care Co-op, we have Molly Iverson, who's part of the original Equal Care Co-op that started in Yorkshire. So she's going to talk about that. And then we have Elvis Mendez, who's worked in the construction industry for over 20 years, but at the current time is a carer for his 82-year-old mum. And he's involved with the Equal Care Co-op and his St. Thomas Church and Clapton Common in developing, in an activist way, rights for the cared for and for carers. And we have Tony Collins-Moore, who's the Carers Wellbeing Academy Manager at Carers Centre Tower Hamlets, has been working in this area for many, many years, since the 1980s, very experienced. And his charity provides services for unpaid carers in the borough. And we have Dr. Ileana Sarafian, who's a postdoctoral researcher at the Centre for Public Authority and International Development here. And I've been working with her on her grants to do with Roma communities in Leicester and London in particular. And she's also been involved in a British Academy grant on trust. You would have heard from her earlier as well. Great. So we thought we'd begin by just sort of 5-minute presentations from all of you about your experiences of care and the difficulties of care during COVID. So we're thinking about the past really, or you can present on your involvement with care and how you became involved in that as an activist. Or yeah, so care. We're starting with the theme of care and how that care was experienced. How you experienced that during COVID. Who wants to go first? Tony, do you want to go?
Okay.
To my right.
All right. So I've been working at the Care Centre for 13 years, and we had an academy where we looked at education and supporting carers to fulfil their caring role in a better way or a more comprehensive way. Anyway, when COVID hit, we had to completely change our approach to carers and how we work with carers. And what became apparent during COVID was that carers were working 100 hours or more per week. They stopped their care packages. They weren't allowing people in. They did everything. They were doing most things anyway, but they did everything. And so what we realized as well at the Care Centre was that the well-being of carers was actually paramount. So what we've done is we've literally changed our academy to the Wellbeing Academy. We've adopted the 5 ways of well-being, and everything we do, when we develop, goes towards looking at how carers can promote their own well-being, because what we believe is that if their well-being is good and optimum, then they are able to be then cared for others, and there's less stress, anxiety, there's less health, health inequalities and things like that. So we use 5 ways of well-being. We use connection around peer support groups and condition-specific groups. We do learning. I'm working with the Open University at the moment to develop a carer's guide to learning, and an UCL around, and the World Health Organization, which is quite bizarre from the last thing, which was about developing a Bangladeshi toolkit on dementia. And I work with the London Buddhist Centre around mindfulness. We do counselling, and so everything we do, these are just a few examples, everything we do looks at the well-being of carers. And we did our annual survey, and doing it this way there's been an increase of 28% in better well-being for carers. So all I would say is, and we've just done a big report to the local authority about investing in the well-being of carers is probably the best money you can spend really in when you commission services. And that's just me in a nutshell.
I'll go next. Yeah, so I guess prior to the pandemic, I was doing culture change projects, mostly residential care settings, older people's care and dementia care. So these were working with the whole organisation, and the focus in all our training and our work was on us, the care providers, the staff, not on them, the people receiving care, or people with dementia. And it was really about, actually in the end, it was kind of it was removing all the institutional features that undermine the quality of the relationships and the quality of interactions in care. So that was a role that it was great to be in, because people often say, actually, oh, it's dementia care, that must have been so hard, but it's only really hard when you don't have any freedom or agency in your role. I was in a rare opportunity. I had a lot of agency in my work in dementia care, because it was about transforming service. It was about making changes happen. It's a very different experience of working in care when you have agency. I got interested in home care when I started to notice, whenever I did training with home care workers, I was very used to like care workers coming back and going, yes, but to any changes. But when it came to people working in home care, their yes, but always sounded so reasonable. It was like, yes, there is too many sort of structural factors which are preventing you from doing anything meaningful in your work. Unfortunately, around the pandemic, because all the care settings went into crisis management mode, actually a lot of them often already were, but it meant there was very little care settings involved in wanting to be doing culture change programs. So that's when I actually had 2 years of not visiting really a care home. And I used to spend 3 days a week at least in a care home working on these projects. So that's when I got more involved in a bit more over that time, working in the community. Actually, I was furloughed for a bit. So I'd say that actually the pandemic, I realized that we probably all talk about how it impacted our care networks, if you like, in different ways. For some people I've met, it stretched or broke their care networks to them. And for mine, it expanded. I was furloughed. I had time. I developed relationships in my community in lots of different ways. And it was actually, that was the beginning of starting to focus on more a cooperative development of a local home care service, working with Equal Care in Calderdale, who first I got in touch with before the pandemic, and then they were really too busy to help with getting anything going during the pandemic. But we tried, we did as much as we can without anything really, with a group of volunteers, really going from that appetite that people had around that time to sort of make a difference in their community, feel more, and people starting to feel more accountable to the well-being of the people in their neighbourhoods. So that's really when we start to build a network in Clapton, in Hackney. And we've recently finally got some grant funding to do what we were trying to do for a couple of years, but for this time with some resources and unfortunately a lot more accountability. Yeah.
Hi, yeah, I'm Molly. I'll talk about Equal Care Co-op to start with, then I'll talk about myself a little bit. So Equal Care is the first like cooperatively owned like giving care and support service. I officially started in 2019 and then was immediately hit by the pandemic. So it's a little further behind than what it was like originally projected to be. And then talking from like my experience working with Equal Care, it's just fantastic. Like honestly, very innovative. I fully believe in like the direction it's going in, and I'm very hopeful that it's going to change like how social care and like just care and support agencies, like their downfalls at the moment. Equal Care have sort of done the opposite of. And yeah, we're very accessible because we have a cooperatively owned platform. So if you just Google Equal Care Co-op, like you'll find everything you need to know about us. You can join as a member if you know people looking for support or people looking to give support. We currently are only like officially functioning in the Calderdale area in West Yorkshire, but as Luke said, we've now got a circle down in, is it Clapton? Yeah. Yep. And the eventual goal is to be like national, like everywhere, and then maybe international. Let's see. Me personally, so I've worked in the care and support industry for 3 years. So I jumped in actually during the pandemic when I was furloughed from a completely unrelated career direction that I was going in. So I've been a care worker for 3 years, but I've also been a carer for many years before that. My first experience of social care was via my granddad, who had vascular dementia. So I was a part-time carer for him. He had care workers coming in as well, and the rest of my family, we worked together as a team to support him. So my perspective is very much like, we was discussing not liking the terminology frontline care worker, but that is what I identify as. And also now through Equal Care, I am a team starter, which means I meet people looking for support and build teams of our workers around them. We do like matching, because we're the be all and end all of Equal Care is that we are relationship centered care and support, as opposed to person centered care and support, which means we're mutual. To the people giving and receiving support are both just as important as each other. Yeah, that's me.
So good afternoon, it's really great to be here. I'm going to tell you 2 stories. So the first story is about myself. So in 2019, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and it was a very successful procedure. I'm a textbook procedure, fully recovered. But in my recovery time, my mum was becoming frail, and the logistics of it, I live in Manchester, she lives in London. So in November, I found myself coming down to London just to support her. And then I found myself really at the sharp end of care, because everything just fell to bits. So I have a wife in Manchester, and I am commuting between London and Manchester, and I'm facing knockback after knockback in terms of how do I take things forward with my mum's care. Having said that, fast track to today, my mum was part of a local community church in Clapton, and her vicar was always somebody who was outward looking in terms of supporting the elderly, and he's carrying this sort of vision for the last 4 years. And when I came down, he said, look, I really want to support you in this. And just like a jigsaw puzzle, we're just having this sort of one-to-one. And the community activist called Marcus met Luke, and we just sort of got sat around the table. It was just amazing that Luke's vision was something that the vicar was carrying for 4 years. So when we got together, it's almost like a jigsaw puzzle come together. But the phrase which a lot of people know is it takes a village to bring up a child, and I'd like to think that it takes a village to care for the elderly, and I think that's what Equal Care are trying to put together in their pioneering sort of pilot, to sort of incorporate this within society. So that's basically my story.
So we started this research mid last year. We wanted to focus on stigma and how the Roma community in the UK, specifically Leicester and in London, was affected by the pandemic. In the process, though, as it happens in ethnographic research, we came across other themes, and we landed on the theme of care so far. And we traced those maps of care that are usually unseen, and I'm here on the outlier because we looked at care capital that is usually unrecognized, and I'll give 3 examples. or domains where care is given, provided, then we usually don't see it as care per se. So the first one comes from young Roma children. So what we found that the children of newly arrived from people here in the UK actually have very higher social capital than their parents, in a way, because they would speak the language, they would have peers who are British, who are well settled, and they would be the one who usually would cook and clean after school, who would be looking after younger siblings, who would be organizing the vaccinations of their parents if they were willing to, who would be talking to doctors, who would be translating for their parents during their parents' meetings as well. So they would be managing medication as well. So a lot of authority was bestowed on these children that we came across. But also that was a huge responsibility. And in the narratives that we've collected, we saw that the children during the pandemic, especially during lockdown, were completely disconnected in a way. Many of their parents would work even under lockdown. I mean, in Leicester, for example, they would work in sewing companies, small ventures that would work 24/7, basically, because there was a demand for this during the pandemic. And these children would look after themselves, after their siblings, after the elderly at home as well. And bearing in mind that the Roma community is a community more likely to suffer with diabetes, heart disease, mortality 10 years younger than the general population. So, and here there was a disruption when the schools closed. There was a disruption in care for these children who found some form of relief by going to school, actually. So there was that disruption in care. And the second part, kind of the second domain that we found, so this is the children and their capital. Often we don't see teachers as carers, actually, but when lockdown happened, teachers who play a central role in the lives of ethnic minority children, usually who direct them either to public authority figures or to local services, couldn't be in touch with those children. So the teachers who we interviewed, for example, would say, because of the lack of digital access, we couldn't reach these children anymore. We couldn't go out. It was all online. We were disconnected. So I'll give you an example. When a child came back to school after the lockdown, the mental health of his mother was exacerbated back at home. The teacher sensed that something's happening with this child. She talked to him, and then the appropriate care was necessitated for the mother. But what the teacher said that during lockdown she couldn't. That wasn't possible. So there was that discontinuation of care, of carescapes, as we say. And the third kind of domain of care that is quite unseen, I think, still, but more visible than others, is the role of the church. Like you said, the local Roma church, it's not even a registered organization. It's an official, informal setting with about 200 people attendance who go on Sundays. They gather in a food bank building. But this is the only place, the only social infrastructure where people can share either food, or they can talk to each other about where to get services, how to get healthcare. So And it was the church during lockdown that actually they were the pastor who was collecting money from people to cook, and to spread food to those communities who are otherwise unseen, completely unseen, under the radar of either local authorities or the community as a whole. So yes, so this is kind of in very general terms the research so far.
Thank you very much. Thank you. As you've all been speaking, it's probably struck me as probably it has other people in the room that, you know, both the Carers Academy and the Equal Care Co-op are such important ideas. And I really wonder whether you can maybe reflect on why care is so invisible in our society and the needs of care are so invisible. And why, in a sense, you're having to sort of reinvent ways to look after the people who are caring. I also have a question about whether it's possible to join together the needs of unpaid carers and paid carers, or whether that's an unbridgeable divide. And I'd like to hear, you know, from people who've experienced, like Elvis, who've experienced difficulties in gaining care, how when he's been made to feel invisible, and what have been the greatest barriers for him to be being seen or needs being seen.
So I'm also a carer, and there is a difference. So bizarrely enough, I'm a qualified care advocate, and I know my way around the system. But I had trouble engaging statutory services for my parents, and knockbacks and serious knockbacks, and then trying to tell me their version of the Care Act. So I didn't say what I did. I just went for it, and then I kind of stumped them a bit by saying, actually, this is how it should be. But so the issue I always have is, if you don't know the system, which most carers don't, how do you negotiate your way through? How do you get the right packages for your loved ones? You know what I mean? And and the other thing that I will say is that carer services like mine, it's not a level playing field. So in some boroughs or some counties or geography, it's a phone number if you're lucky. Do you know what I mean? We're quite lucky in Tower Hamlets. We have a physical centre with a staff team of 15 people, and we all do different jobs. But I do worry, and I've always worried, even when I work there, is that I spend most of my time advocating for carers as well as developing wellbeing initiatives, and part of that is advocacy, and I think it's difficult. And I think there is a huge difference between a paid care worker and a unpaid. And so there's a huge difference, and it's not about the money, it's just about what happens. You know what I mean? I think there is a role for paid care workers. My sister is a senior care worker, she's been doing it for 25 years. So, and that's another issue between my sister and I. We had everything sewn up, experientially and qualification wise, but it still wasn't enough for our parents. Do you know what I mean? So, and I was told that I couldn't register as a carer for my dad because I only dealt with him from afar. So, do you know what I mean? So, and somebody who said that they were part, can I just say something?
Yes.
From a carer perspective, when you say I'm a part-time carer, no one's a part-time carer, you're just a carer. Do you know what I mean? So, do you know what I mean? So I just wanted to correct you on that. There's nothing part-time about caring. So
yeah, I suppose I said that in the context of not wanting to seem as though I was the sole carer for someone. I guess I was trying to recognise that.
No, I know. I was thinking,
But to be fair, that brings me. You asked about how to bridge the gap. I think Equal Care, I hope, is doing quite a good, making quite a good effort of reaching that gap. In the structure of the teams that we build around somebody that's being supported. So when I say a team, I mean workers that have come through or work with Equal Care, because we have independent self-employed workers, we also have employed workers, and carers for those people, so family members, friends, peers, other agencies can be part of this team, services like, for example, a physio or an OT or a GP, they can be part of this team. And at Equal Care, we have a platform where essentially anyone can be a member of this platform with the permission of what we would call a team owner, that's the person being supported. With their permission, anybody that they consider a part of their team can become a member of the platform. That means that they've got access to Rocket Chat, which is essentially like WhatsApp, but more private. And the Rocket Chat groups exclusive to the team owners, where we keep our notes, we communicate with each other within the team, logistically, and also it's kind of nice to just have that camaraderie, like, because there's so many different angles that someone can give support from and be cared for by. I think having these teams at Equal Care is our effort to bring it all into one space, and that space is very visible to the person being supported, because I feel like, don't get me wrong, sometimes people don't want to know what's going on, like sort of behind the curtain, but a lot of times they're not given the option to, and those decisions are made away from them. And yeah, and also in terms of the difference between carers and care workers, I have to say from my personal experience, one of the biggest differences I found is being listened to by services. For example, social services. If a family member, I've done it myself, I flagged up safeguarding for my grandfather as a family member, got nowhere at all. Flagged up the same safeguarding as a team starter at Equal Care, actually got listened to. Yeah, that's the difference, and it is unfair. It's very unfair. It doesn't recognise.
It's also illegal.
I'm not going to say where I did it or who to, but yeah,
It happens in healthcare as well. There's across the board, there's across all the agencies, sorry.
The thing just to elaborate on that teams model is just to give you a picture. Some of you might not be familiar with how home care normally operates, but usually it's an individual visiting another individual in a household and delivering kind of care. That individual, that care worker, doesn't usually have any freedom or control over their day. They're sent to a number of places in very tight time windows. They don't necessarily have any means to communicate or connect with the person they're supporting's wider support network. So they're supposed to support now the well-being of this individual without collaborating or connecting to that person's, if you like, the networks that might sustain their well-being or be part of play an important role in that. And so with the teams model, what we're trying to do is, actually care always happens in a team, and the team is made up of carers, care workers, neighbours, but what we're trying to bring is, just like during the pandemic when you saw mutual aid groups sort of using WhatsApp, because we're a care provider, we have to bring a bit more scrutiny to the way information is shared. So the platform in a way is being built to enable a sort of more networked, decentralised sort of coordination and modelling of provision of care, but in a way which meets CQC requirements and local authority regulations. So we couldn't use in an official Equal Care team WhatsApp for various reasons or other platforms. And at least with the if people collaborate through our platform, the team owner gets to decide exactly who can see what. So they can set the permissions. So it's been built in mind. So most platforms for care work agencies are built with a sort of more centralized remote management control. So it's a platform that enables a manager, gives them control and oversight over the care. Whereas with our platform, it's shifting power and control to the care worker, the family care and the recipient of care. So that's the sort of teams model. And in Clapton, what we're trying to do is build on that. And we're looking at how can teams actually be more embedded in a wider local landscape of care and support. So how can we make it an even more networked experience of care? So that's the the pilot we're doing with the help of Elvis in a community that his mum lives in, and actually and I also live in, is figuring out ways. We're actually starting with mapping. We're putting we want to put teams on the map, and care teams should get the same, if you like, status and recognition as any other voluntary service or organization, but they're invisible. So home care is invisible. We're trying to make it more visible and more integrated into a network. So that's the kind of experiment we're beginning.
I think you asked the question, how does it make me feel as a carer, whether I'm heard or whether I feel I'm supported. And I think it's all about community. That's what I'm learning, but it's so much to do with community. And like I mentioned, within the first week of meeting Luke, we sat down and did a mapping exercise based on me, and it really opened my eyes on how community is really important in terms of I as an individual supporting my mum, getting lost in this vacuum of just being focused on my mum, but not being cared for. And so very quickly, I put in place for myself self-help, and it's purely because of the mapping that Luke did. So I'm part of a men's group who meet on Zoom every Monday called Mental. They're based in Stockport in Manchester, and we just talk about issues that men are going through. And that helps me to be able to function, not to be isolated, and to share things that are really, really emotionally and mentally challenging. So I think community, out of lockdown, there's a lot of little things which began to happen. Community seems to be shaping in different ways, and I think that's a positive.
I was going to say, I totally agree with you. So one of the things that did happen within the carer centre is that the carers themselves developed their own WhatsApp group and a community within a community. And I think they've got something like 150 people on a WhatsApp group, and they send each other positive messages every day, and they help each other out. And then they use it I use it with one of the people to say, don't forget there's a certain activity on today if you want to come in and join in, or they'll come back to me and say, so-and-so's dad passed away or something like that, and then we can reach out. And it's been really, really interactive with a charity, a recognised charity, but also an informal community group that's developed out of COVID, and it's been really good. Yeah, really, really positive.
And I suppose what you're doing is you're making absolutely visible both to the carers and to the person who's being cared for, the importance of these relationships. And obviously you can imagine a version of this people care for mapping that would include the young adults who are supporting their own parents as well. So there's a real flexibility to the model that breaks through all of those barriers and shows that each of these forms of care are making some kind of contribution. So care work may be different from unpaid care work, but there's a place for both of them. And Luke and I were talking about that just by coincidence a few moments back before this began. We were talking about the role that a paid carer can do for someone who's suffering from dementia, who can really take care of that person in a kind of neutral way without that sense of grief and loss about the person who has been lost. And there's a kind of equal role for the person who's paid to do that.
I'm just going to say actually a bit relates to all the different care labour that the children were doing in Roma communities. I guess one of an exercise, if you like, that precedes the care mapping that we do is a really short exercise on seeing care, and it's just a sort of circle with like lots of separated into pies, little segments, and it highlights all the different types of care labour that we all do in one way or another in our lives. And it was the first time I used that tool myself, and suddenly, you basically colour in the pie. How full is your life with family coordination? How full of your life is with medical activities? It was the first time I actually really wrote down or thought about the different forms of care labour. And I guess being a new father, It's taken me a while for the penny to drop. Just how much, for example, family coordination, planning, just planning, making sure my kids get this or that, it was a lot of it happens very gendered work behind the scenes, and it doesn't get recognized and it's not talked about. So I really wanted to, since then I've been a bit of a care activist in let's talk about seeing all the different forms of care labor that are out there. So I've been doing that exercise as many people can. It's quite a provocative exercise because you can imagine it highlights just how much or little certain people in your care networks are doing.
You asked about why care is so invisible, and that's a complex question, but it's important to think of care also as an HUD too. So social listening is important, and I completely agree that money is not everything, and it's not really about paid and unpaid care, although this is important, but it's also about recognizing that some layers of society can be more marginalized, and they can be more deprived, and they can have less access to even simple, taken for granted facilities that others. So I'll give you an example, and I think it's because it's about moralities as well, in a way. So because care has that moralizing connotation, and that's why we don't talk about this, don't we? So a young school boy, 15 years old, constantly goes into detention, and when we interviewed the teacher, she said, well, I just don't know, I don't know what to do with him, because detention is the only way, but I need to speak to him, I need to hear from him, tell me about the Roma community. And there is a real willingness, I think, on the part of teachers to understand more about the community that is not very well understood here in the UK. But what was happening in the life of this boy was that his mum was made redundant during the COVID-19 pandemic, and he after school he found a job in a pub. So stayed overnight, for a very long time after midnight, and then he goes to school completely exhausted. And he cannot perform very well, of course, but he doesn't talk about this at all, because again, because of that moralizing, because it's about moral, you don't speak about this, you're not supposed to work when you are 15 or 16. So these are things unseen that we uncover through, and as you say, these are maps that we can pull, and they can come to them. If the teacher knew about this, I think the attitude and then the follow-up will be different.
Yes, it's been really interesting to see what care burdens have been made visible through the pandemic. Sort of middle class, middle-aged women's care burdens have been made very visible, but there are other forms of care burden that still remain invisible, like young adults. So I mean, thinking about the sort of after effects of the COVID pandemic, do you think, in your optimistic moments, do you feel that something has shifted as a result of visibility of care burdens in the pandemic, or do you think things are just the same? Do you see any, and if they are just the same, what are the greatest barriers to them changing?
Well, I would say from a care coordinator's point of view that, like I was saying earlier, that speaking as a family member of somebody and being basically unheard versus coming from an organisation's point of view and then all of a sudden magically being heard over the same context, that because of the pandemic, I would say, and it highlighting that problem, some things that I guess you could say have a positive long-term effect is that I think that there is more support available for people who were otherwise unheard before, carers that weren't listened to. Speaking from my personal perspective, like I would be more likely to approach a carer to say, you know, have you reached out to this organisation? How have you got on with like contacting GPs or social services? And basically listening out for someone to say, no, I've been ignored, and then going, I'll do it for you then, because I have this to back me up. So I would say in that way, yeah, that is one of the effects. And we wouldn't have known that unless the pandemic had sort of, I mean, forced that out of the woodwork.
So the carers that I work with, it's an East London borough, quite working class. And so a lot of carers are now saying that the thing that they do hope optimistically is, I know it's awful, but because there's like a 3.5 million new carers due to the pandemic, that and the pandemic hit everybody, every sort of working class social area like that. What they're saying now is that they hope that there's more middle class or anything like that, where sort of like professional, you know, well-spoken carer, that, you know, statutory services or government are going to have to listen to them, because there's a different dynamic to carers than previously. So what my carers would say is that they were unheard or misheard or not listened to because they were East End working class, and that you know, oh, you know, we can just brush over you. But now with this new set of carers that are coming in, they're hoping that they can't use those tactics as they had historically. Yeah.
The thing I noticed maybe from joining the cooperative movement around that time was that cooperative model of ownership, which seems to be most people, you know, get behind that. If you know, as soon as you explain, oh, it's a care service which is run and owned by the people who give and receive care, then it doesn't matter what your politics is. Most people think that it's just, yeah, that makes sense, you know, and it's something people get excited by. And actually what I've noticed is how much people want to support and make it happen. So it's meant that we've had a lot of support from a whole different range of people, from on a local community level to just other professionals and experts on different, we're willing to share. There's a cooperative culture anyway, I think, in collaboration with local community networks. But it certainly seems like people are much more supportive of a different model of ownership around care.
Yeah, I agree with that. And just to add as well, like on a positive note, I've made teams or met people that have needed support, people that have been involved in the co-op long before I was involved in the co-op, and they was either investors or they just had heard about it and was like rooting for it, who were then in a position to need support for themselves or for their loved ones. And it's so nice, like almost the excitement that you can feel from people that are like, yes, I love this, I love this co-op, like, and even though obviously ideally nobody ever wants to be in the position where they need support from somebody else, but almost an excitement that they can finally be like, yes, now it's like my turn, because I've watched everyone else benefit from this and now it's my turn too. So absolutely, like the sense of community is so strong. It's great.
Great, yeah, we'll take some questions too.
I just wanted to say, when you talk about why is sort of unpaid caring invisible, I wonder if there's something in British society about caring and whether it's seen as something that people used to do, maybe sort of pre-war and after the war, and then it sort of fizzled out as our gender roles changed. And I do feel that people that are, I'm an unpaid carer, I'm 24/7 with 2 elderly people, they're really frail, and now I'm palliative care. When I want to speak to a GP, it takes me 4 weeks to get someone to come out for a home visit. If I spoke to Tony, I know that would happen within days. And I think what's sad is that we rely on institutions and agencies to be our voice, and that's what's sad. I think there are organisations and agencies that can help us, But essentially we feel quite isolated and alone, and we need to be recognised for doing something that I guess it's not valued by anybody, and I understand caregiving in general is not valued by anybody, but it's valuing everybody and their role in society, whatever we do. So whether it's paid or unpaid, it's just I'm not very articulating it very well, but what I mean is I would just like society to understand that because somebody works doesn't give them more credibility over somebody that doesn't work and looks after somebody. I think just because you have a role, you have a job and you're paid for it, doesn't mean that you are more of a person, that you are more of a human being than somebody that looks after another individual.
Yeah.
And that's important.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying is so important, because basically when you have a welfare state that was designed to support workers
Yeah.
when they were out of work or they became sick or whatever else, but it wasn't designed to support what goes on that other vital piece of work, which is the work of caring.
Yeah.
And that's the basic problem as far as I can see.
But Care Act is that, and I
Yeah.
think what I do believe is the Care Act came out in 2014. It's now, it'll be 10 years old next year. I think it's time for a review of
Yeah.
it. And I think the most important part of that is missing is that, so the Care Act says that the needs of the carer must be met. Okay, so that's more practically, emotionally, that kind of thing. What I think they're missing is that carers should be heard and should be a vital voice within the care of the person they care for, and that they have to be listened to on an equal basis to professionals.
Yeah.
So that's basically what Chadwiga said, that it can't be ignored, because carers know the person they care for better than anybody.
Mhm.
And I think that's what should happen.
I just want to say, so I came with Tony. I didn't. The word, I think that people don't want to be associated with the word carer because it seems kind of old. It seems like you're looking for someone who's in frail, like all the things that come with it. So the reason I ran into Tony is because I didn't even know I was a carer. So I don't live as far away. I live close to my mum, but it becomes a 24/7 thing that you do, and you don't think about anything else. You just think of the care of your parent. So she's losing hearing in one ear. She's got heart condition. She's got high blood pressure. And to look at her on the surface, she seems to be fine. But when you try and talk to her, she can't hear. So it's sometimes taking all that on board and then convincing your parent that all the stuff that needs to fall into space. And the other thing I wanted to big you up on, because there is, as a male, because society says you're supposed to be hard and you're not supposed to, show your emotions, there isn't that kind of group that you need to be able to talk to other people. So when I came to the carer centre, I then realised there are other carers and there are other people that do the same thing that I do. And then it became a kind of, a bit of relief. And what you're doing as well, the Care App, I think it should be nationwide. I think most boroughs should have it, most cities should have it, because, and the comment that you said about it takes a village to look after a kid, I think it takes a village to look after a parent once you look at the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they're so powerful what you're doing, and it made me think that as a male, I don't like, if you call a barman is now called a mixologist, so I need a new word for carers. But we need a new word. Then I can wear it like a badge of honor, and I'm proud of what I do, but I don't consider myself to be a carer. And I know other men that don't consider themselves to be carers that have looked after their parents, relatives that have passed away. And I've said there's a carer centre, and they didn't even know this thing existed. And the other thing I would say, Tony, as well, is the Carers Act is 10 years coming up. Then we need to kind of get this into public awareness, so carers know what, one, their rights are, and two, what they can do or to look out for. So it's kind of that. So thank you very much.
Just said I'm doing a workshop on that on Wednesday.
Oh, cool, yeah.
All right, go on. Yeah.
Thanks. I just wanted to pick up on something that word you used, Lloyd, convincing. Because I don't know, I'm watching my mother care for her mother, who is, and I wish they lived in Clapton, but they and I've watched my mother since my grandfather died in October absolutely become a shell of herself. And part of that has been about, sorry, these guys know about it, but part of that has been because of the miscommunication between my mother and my grandmother, my mother feeling like she has this moral obligation to my grandmother, and my grandmother pretending or not admitting that she needs certain forms of care, not wanting to spend money, so it's all this kind of like this kind of smoke and mirrors that goes on, where they kind of are performing different roles for each other, and they're upsetting each other, and it's all really horrible and and really sad that this is like they're both grieving, all sorts of things. So my question to you guys, particularly to the Equal Care Co-op, but also to you, Tony, and Lloyd and Chandrika at the Care Centre, is how do you manage this messy relational, cultural, moral work? And my nerdy bit of the question is, it's so interesting you use Rocket Chat, because Rocket Chat is what we use. Lottie and I used to work for an organization called SHM Foundation that ran peer-to-peer psychosocial support groups. And we used Rocket Chat because it was like WhatsApp, but you can control, things can be anonymous and you can do this decentralized control. So I was just wondering, how do you do that messy relational bit? And how do you, and how is that maybe facilitated by the digital infrastructure of something like Rocket Chat? Or is it people having to just convince people? Yeah.
Yeah, good question. And I'm sorry to hear about that situation. I'm sure almost everybody in the room has felt the same and seen the same scenes. So in terms of like, sort of what could Equal Care do that would help the situation between your mom and your grandmother? To me, that immediately makes me go back to what Luke was saying, I think to me earlier, about how so in the case of like if someone's got dementia, so in a lot of cases, like the family member or the friend that might be giving support and caring for that person, they are grieving themselves, and therefore, because of that, they cannot give the best quality of support, I suppose, but they need support for themselves too. So they're kind of stuck in the middle. So I think Equal Care, or having a worker from Equal Care, would be really helpful, because it's kind of like a unbiased perspective and involvement. So someone that listens to both perspectives, and we're not judges or the jurisdiction, so we're not going to say, oh, you're wrong, this is right. But I guess having maybe like a buffer or a little bit of pressure off of your mom, thinking, oh, I've got to do this and I need to do that. If she can pass on some of those things, if she wanted to a worker, then your mom and your grandmother can concentrate on their relationship more with. I honestly think one of the hardest things to ever go through or witness in social care is changing in relationship dynamics. It's horrible, especially if you're grieving. Even if that person that you're grieving for is sat in front of you, in some ways that makes it worse. And I think Equal Care, like, we recognise that many of us have been carers or have been care workers for many years, and provide the space, I suppose, to be able for someone to express and say, this isn't happy, like, I'm not efficient where we are right now in our relationship. What can you offer that can help? Like, we're very tailored support. Some teams that we only do virtual advocacy or remote advocacy. That person, that's it, and they can continue having those relationships with their family or their friends, but they have someone else from us that sort of deals with the more logistical side, I suppose, of support. Luke, anything that you would change in that? Sorry.
I guess the only other thing that I was thinking about, which is
you know, when it's focused on two individuals supporting each other, whereas thinking about looking at wider support networks is, I agree totally. It's very hard to change dynamics, family dynamics in the stressful situations. So I have very low expectations. It's very occasionally you meet a family carer who's really, oh, I'll try this technique. Oh, adapt my, oh, you mean change the way I'm being with my mum? You know, oh, I'll try that. You know, that's pretty rare. But the other thing is like when we're building a team, you decide as a group, that team decides, so what are the hats that need to be worn? You know, it's basically starting to see care again, you know, name all the different forms of care that happens. There's the coordination of hours, there's the getting materials, there's, you know, all the different hats that tasks that need to be done, and then who's wearing what hats, and that makes it more visible and it highlights a little bit. And also, I think I've heard it a lot in, you were talking about in teams, is sometimes when there's care, if you like, care labor of one kind or another, which is everyone and no one's responsibility, then it somehow doesn't get done, or it's if the one person is always picking it up and it creates stress. Whereas if you name it, at least you can start to have conversations about, you know, the roles people can play.
Yeah, I also, sorry, Tony, real quick, just wanted to say that we were talking earlier about moral obligation, especially within families. I don't feel like it's important to say, and it's something that we really advocate at Equal Care. You absolutely can say no, like, no, I don't want to do that. Actually, this is my boundary. I want to have a mother-daughter relationship with this person, or I want to have, you know, a brother-sister relationship. I don't want to be their carer in that way, kind of thing. I think in like conventional care agencies that the support isn't even offered to family members and stuff for that to be an option. But I think that should be a more widespread, like, mind space.
I'm going to say, from my point of view, I've actually wiped the floor with a few social workers who have said to carers it's your moral obligation. So I've advocated and made that, you know, disappear for that carer. But I've just talked from the care centre point of view. So we are quite rare in the fact that we are entrusted by the local authority to undertake the statutory carers needs assessment. It's not very often done. It's normally done by social work teams. So we look at it from a carer perspective rather than a local authority perspective. So the support that we give the carer is very holistic. So out of that, there will be like looking at like the shared labour, you know, the care labour and stuff like that, and who does what and everything like that, and how that is. We then work with the carer around being assertive with other family members about sharing, being assertive with local authority, being assertive with the person they care for. They're also offered psychotherapy. We have an in-house counsellor who then gives them mechanisms for coping and dealing with things like that. We also do some work and workshop. I run a workshop that I developed around preparing somebody around having conversations around lasting power of attorney and will making and funeral planning. I say that, but I told my parents for 12 years, and unfortunately my dad passed away a month ago, and I'm just picking up the pieces because they didn't take my advice. And so I can do it, but it doesn't always work. Do you know what I mean? So like when my parents, they're like, my mum actually said to me once, "Are you sure you know what you're talking about?" And then my mum's now got dementia, and I said to her last year, I said, "You do know I did spoke to you?" "No, you never." Like that. So she doesn't believe that I actually had this conversation. And even my dad said, "No, he did." Do you know what I mean? So yeah, so it, you know, you can. There's lots of things out there, but it doesn't always work. It's hard to have conversations.
Yeah.
I don't know, I just had this question. Before yesterday, I visited my friend who had that died. He had dementia, but he fell out the womb. And this is one of the things I see in our community or our culture. Really, there is a little bit shame because you need to be the care of your parents. That is how we grow up. And sometimes what I notice in our community is that shame. I cannot ask for care because there is the guilt and there's a sense of grieving, and it never been not allowed to have that conversation. I was carer when I was 12 years old, to my grandma who had dementia. But the question is how you think the care system can having this difficult combination, because there is generation who believe they entitled for their children to look after them. And there is other side, and then look after you, because life is not no more just us and having the life becoming this speed and this responsibility. And I feel like I've seen a lot of family, like my friend, I saw that family, they grieving is 3 times because they guilt, did we looked after him enough? And the other question, why we didn't, but it's been doing a year and they're all educated, but the problem, that step, we need to have care of our father. It was never been in the table because the long historic belief and religion, and sometimes there is religious side of it. You need to responsible for your parents too. How you think we can break that conversation? Why you think it's different cultural view?
I would, we in equal care, what we try and start to build team, before we build a team, we build a circle. So that circle is a group of people from a community who want to, who are interested in a cooperative model of care, trying to address their needs in what way they can through this team's model. What I imagine happening in London is communities from different backgrounds set up their own circles. The idea that a circle like our current circle could address the complicated needs and understand the cultural nuances of another community who's actually probably only 5 minutes away from where we are. Actually, what we would want to do is support a group to start having those conversations, and ideally have a group that's kind of representative of the local people who are interested in providing care, family carers, so that you can give, it's a forum to enable communities from different backgrounds to launch their own service, but from which they can make decisions together about using a platform that enables them to provide care that meets regulations, because that it's never going to get to scale if it doesn't meet these standards.
What you said resonated so much with me. But the other thing I realized when I didn't realize a couple of years ago that I was a carer was that I've never had this conversation with my parents. I've never had this, and then there's a moment that happens, something happens, and it dawns on you that you're now the adult making the decision for your parent, and that to me, it spun my head for a good few months, because I'm like realizing I'm making the better decisions for you now. You're like, not that my mum had dementia, but I was making the better decisions by doing a bit of research on my phone or by talking to Tony, and I'm like, I come back, Mum, this is not what we do, but let's try this. And she's like, oh yeah, that sounds okay. So that conversation is one of the most uncomfortable conversations to have, I think, to be able to go and not to feel guilty, because I had a friend who his mum and dad had dementia, and he was a group of 5, and he was the youngest, and he had to call a family meeting to say who's going to take responsibility for this, because I can't do it all myself. And he was doing what you were doing, traveling backwards and forwards, and it was burning him out. He was getting burnt out. And then you had other siblings that didn't want to admit that their parents had dementia. So then there's the clash of going, guys, there's something serious that's happening here, and we need to kind of look at it. And if they don't know there's no help, it becomes your family or the individual looking after your parents, and that's a lot of pressure, especially in the world we live in. So I totally hear that point. It's like to have that strange but conversation that's needed, and it's when to do it or how to have it. And I think that's a massive point that I never visioned having as a kid. I've got kids myself, like you said, I've got kids myself, and then to know that, okay, Nan can't hear out of one ear, and then you got to explain this to your 2 kids, and oh yeah, but it's Nanny. I'm like, I can hear, but Nanny's getting older now, and my mum doesn't want to admit that she's getting older, but you can see it. You can see it by the things they do, and I'm like, okay, I'm now the adult. I'm now the one who's got to take all of this on my shoulders, but also be the rock. So it is kind of hard, and I totally. You made me think about that. I was like, oh, I didn't like that conversation. I didn't like.
It's why we need these organisations like Tony's to just, just to equip you. Yeah, do you want to go ahead? And then I have a question.
Yeah, I'm Isaac from the LSE thanks so much. Really, really fascinating and actually encouraging, because I remember speaking to Emma, quite a few years back, 2018 or 2019, and it's very nice to know that it's coming home to East London. So that's good. My question is, I just want to return to the tension that Laura raised between care's paid work and care's unpaid work. You know, in what you've discussed, you evoke this tension as it plays out in our everyday challenges as those who give care, those with relatives needing care, and so on. But it's also a tension that exists at a kind of a level of national politics, right?
Yeah.
And so, for example, if there's any hope of like a major shift in the fortunes of people who are carers or care workers, it's going to come from a change in the national government via the entry of a party called the Labour Party, which is if there's any hope in the short period of time that will come from that. Maybe we hope not much, but that's something which is on the table. Possibly they've spoken about something called the National Care Service. What that is it depends, right? According to for the trade unions, this is about trying to bring care back in-house to local government. Okay, it's trying to improve the dignity in work for local council employed care workers. It's not about cooperatives. It's not about the third sector, because this is seen as a step backwards. For people who are carers, maybe the concern is more with a much better recognition of their rights, their needs, etc. Now, intellectually, the same tension is there. You have some people who are much more concerned with, okay, 5% of the population works in care anyway. How can we make this well-paid work? How can we bring this as an opportunity to the more depressed parts of this country? How can we have an inclusive industrial strategy effectively around care work? On the other hand, you have people who are maybe more theoretical, who are concerned with post-work. How can we give people UBI? How can we decommodify care work? How can we make it so that we have less working time and more time for everyone to be a carer? So these are that's the intellectual version of this debate that anthropologists think about, but there's a very practical ramification. Now, it seems to me what Equal Care Corps does is kind of model in a sort of micro-utopian way, a way for paid care workers and unpaid care workers to see their interests harmonized as opposed to in inevitable tension. But I guess my question for you guys, who are all the experts in this, at the level of national political debate, how do we visualize that common interest so that when change does eventually come in a couple of years' time or 12 years' time, the changes that are brought in can benefit everyone as opposed to only benefiting one side of the equation? How do you build a political coalition?
What a stunning question. And my question was going to which kind of build on yours, Isaac, which is really the question of what would you be able to fit in the short term? Around the ways in which provisioning and care takes place at the local authority level. I mean, there are all sorts of constraints. The ability of people to have the ability to move their care into the private sector, but that doesn't mean you don't have the capacity yet to do that, and there are problems with getting people to make that change. So, if we're going to think about top-down politics, which a really, really important question, which is what is the model here? What can the model be? What is the different, macro model? But what is the different micro model? Like things that you could have a conversation with local authorities about now.
I guess I was thinking, I think those are great questions, and I don't have a clear answer, though. I lean towards UBI. But I think though that it's interesting to sort of think about what because we're talking about how is care going to be bought? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think it was interesting. We started doing this work, really grassroots stuff, and started trying to set up these activities and relationships in the sheltered housing place. And we've built some really great relationships with some of the residents there, and we've made some really great connections. And then the tender came up for the in-house care team in that sheltered housing. And so naive, I was thinking, oh, let's see if we can put in a tender for this, and I looked at it and I was right, the current provider had a turnover of 8 million. They'd lumped one sheltered housing group with another one, so it was a massive scale, and then we would have had to take on the workers of it was just totally, there was no way we would have had a chance, and we would have to be huge really to have a chance for that. And what struck me was the difference between how funding for care, but buying care and the community development grants I was trying to apply for to get some resources for our group. And they're totally different kinds of questions. And I thought actually care should be bought in a similar way as grants are made, you know, like, because usually when you apply for a grant in the world of community development stuff, they ask you, what relationship do you have with the group that you're going to help? You know, how representative are you of that group? What's your experiences of co-production? You know, can you point to some things? Those questions weren't in there. They just sort of add a bit of social value on there, and sort of somehow you make some claims that I doubt they're going to really, you know, evaluate or check up on. You know? But I thought actually we should be moving towards thinking about care through grant making, and then maybe that shapes then what forms of ownership then apply for those grants.
From my perspective, they worked it out on an average year, unpaid carers save the government 135 billion. Okay, so they call it unpaid carers the second NHS. Okay, so some of that money should filter back down to local authorities so they can invest in. So, for instance, but then also there's another thing that I think should happen is that commissioners from local authorities need to be less short-sighted and need to think long-term. So there was a shortfall in money last year. We got a little bit more money. So we were then invested in more wellbeing activities, which then, as I mentioned, when we did our feedback and surveys, that there was a rise in better wellbeing. But the funding's ended. It ended at the end of March. And so we've gone back down to re-scraping and developing stuff and doing stuff that I can do. Now, what I do think is that, so in Tower Hamlets, the unpaid carers saved the borough 500 billion. Okay, so some of that should filter back down. That investment should happen. There should be investment into carers. There should be a long-term sustainable investment in unpaid carer services. I think that should be across the board. It shouldn't be a telephone in one borough and it shouldn't be a centre in another. It should be a level playing field. I think what should happen is, I like the idea that we work together, you know what I mean? And that, you know, there should be more investment in social care. I think I've heard integrated commissioning and services for, I've worked in health and social care for 4 years. I've heard it, but I can't see any better way of, you know, it's no different to when I was 19. You know what I mean? When I came to London when I was 19. So do you know what I mean? So I think there needs to be less lip service and more action. That should definitely be across the board, and more investment.
It's really interesting because the new integrated care system, which is what I was sort of referring to in the NHS one, you know, you're talking about thing. The problem with that is it's just having voluntary groups as representatives on committees.
Yeah,
you know, that's
definitely.
not giving more funding. That's not, you know, it's just someone has to turn up and be on another committee.
Yeah.
Also, and one last thing, it shouldn't just be health and the local authority. The other big player in everything that really needs to come in and be regulated and working is housing.
Yes.
So housing is the biggest letdown in any area. You know what I mean? They think they can work independently and make profits. They need to be more accountable because housing is integral to integrated care.
Yeah, so the budget is there for care provision. Like Tony says, there's savings, the fact that the budget's set, that means there's money allocated. And if they can, so for instance, I'll give you a story. My mum has bladder issues, she had a catheter fitted. So it means a district nurse coming to visit her, to treat her. On the second day, she got released from hospital. The district nurse turned up and says, I'm here to show you how to flush out the... I said, I'm not doing that, I'm going to make a change. Now, what makes me think is how many people within the community think they have that duty to do that. That's saving money. So agencies have this thing where they tender all the work at a very lean rate. And that impacts on the care. So I'll have a district nurse who'll come in flustered, irate, and it's not down to the individual being a nasty person, it's just the pressure of, and then I have to be an advocate and say, excuse me, this is my mum.
Yeah.
So I have found myself clashing with people, standing back and thinking, was I right in doing that? So there's all these different things, these different emotions and different things where you're an advocate, you're caring for your mum, you're trying to understand the care system. So it's a very, very complicated situation. And just, you know, your mum who's in Australia, she needs to somehow within her community build a circle, because what she's going to find is that she's going to get burnt out. She has to have respite. And it means setting boundaries, and it's one of the most difficult things I've had to do with my mum. Set boundaries, because you have to walk away and you're thinking, am I doing this? But you have to for your mental health.
Yes, I also agree with what you said. I also want to say that some forms of care in some communities, especially marginalized minority groups, will have to stay at that level. Basically, they have to stay in the intimate kinship environment. They cannot be scaled up because of cultural, religious reasons and others. So sometimes, I mean, in my case, for example, where I know the Roma Gypsy traveler communities and their relationship with the state and the state provision, in a way, it can be detrimental in a way. It could be perceived as a complete overtaking of the community. So I think there needs to be a balance there, and diverse.
Yeah, so what you're saying, Eliana, is really that we need the voluntary sector and these different diversified forms of the voluntary sector. And it was very interesting what Isaac was saying, that somehow the conversation in the Labour Party is that that's an old-fashioned route, even though, you know, it functioned reasonably well under late period New Labour, which that kind of channeling of funding from central government. So it's interesting that, in a sense, the thinkers in the Labour Party have kind of skipped too far ahead to the society of complete leisure.
I don't know if the Labour Party says that. The unions definitely say it. You can see why, but they're speaking for workers.
Because they're speaking for workers, exactly. So, I mean, maybe that leads to the question of, do you all think that the voluntary sector is the best place for this to happen, for all of this to happen? Or yes. I suppose my question is there anything that should be taken back by the state that it used to provide, or anything in the future that the state should provide that it isn't?
Money.
Even some of it back to sheltered, what is it, sheltered accommodation? Like, some of this is run by a private firm. And it seems that they don't really care because that's someone's parent. And my mum used to be a carer, and the home I went to, it's like, okay, you've got some families that are full on, like some people in this room that want to take care of their parents, and it broke their heart for their parent to go into that care, and then to not be looked after by someone else, you don't feel really bad, and then you're trying to go through the legal system and say, to make sure your mum's looked after. I think that private care, maybe that start there, and maybe there should be circles in all communities, because there's some people that like to care and help you out and be in contact with those people, so you can have a day off or a couple of hours off without feeling too guilty, because you feel bad if you go, no, I can't, I don't want to do that for my mum, or but you should be allowed to say, I can't do that, I can't physically and mentally do it. So
it seems like we need co-ops, cooperative housing as well as cooperative circles. Yes, please.
I find it very interesting what you said about, are there things that a centralized government should keep on doing? The only thing I'm thinking about here is that the socially organized way of doing this care, it requires social capital, and some people are excluded and do not have this. And then who takes care of them?
It's a really, really important question. I think Isaac, you have this.
Well, I'm just coming back to what you said is the voluntary sector the right place for this? I don't know. In our reading group recently, we read Leah Peepsner Lakshmi, what's her name? Leah Peepsner Lakshmi Samarasinhan, that book, Care Work on Dreaming Disability Justice. And that's like articulating a really kind of clear vision of like care collectives and webs of care, where in order to give care, you need to be sustained and supported. And it's a model of kind of mutual aid, which is in recognition of what you're talking about, Ileana, about the ways in which the state is such a negative force that some communities, you need to take things in hand and do it yourselves. But even in the context of that, like she's prizing open the really corrosive dynamics which come into care, whatever modality it is happening through, whether it's through family, whether it's through mutual aid, whether it's through voluntary groups, and whether it's through the state. And she sort of lands in this position where she's sort of just, you know, articulating this really strong collective model, but at the same time saying, you need to kind of have lots of options on the table and be able to move between. And even within these really sort of radical mutual aid collectives, there comes a point where you're burnt out and you need to have the respite care, which is enabled by the state. And so I don't know. Don't think it's only in the voluntary sector.
No, that's really, really
We need that diversity.
I wonder if the education system play a role, because the care word is bare, left over of society.
Yeah.
And then some kind of like, for us, the example in the community is the more you get older, the more your hierarchy up in society, you the wisdom, you respect you. And now when we look at care, or what it's actually, we need more education more than anything ever, because it's the people not being needed. And sometimes you hear conversation with people saying, this all the people, they don't understand. Oh, they just, no one talks to them. And it's really broken heart sometimes. This is the association with the word care. It's not no more I'm helping you because you're losing your physical ability a little bit. And now we care about you. The word I don't think is mentioned because there is a stigma with it. And how we look at these people, I think some point is just to start an education, because it's the barren people and young people who becoming care in school. I see young people like youth therapy who care, and they feel shame to say that because they cannot say it's no safe place, and they've been bullied in school and how they are. And I think somehow we're bullying these people, we dismiss them, and then the other hand be saying, oh, we care about you.
And it's fascinating what you're saying, Scott, because it shows the difference between the qualities of care when it's associated with the elderly versus the young. And we have to think about these different moralizations of those positions and why, you know, the care for the young is seen as valuable to the extent it is at all, but it is seen as valuable because it's producing, you know, the next generation of workers. But the elderly are, you know, that care is, you know, what is the place of that? Yeah. Yes, it is.
I'm Des Blake from New Aim COVID Champions. I was just going to ask, excuse my ignorance, but is there such thing as a national carers network, and does it work?
Yeah. There is the Carers Trust. So the Carers Trust is a national organisation that provides information about where a carer can go and what's in your local authority or in your local area. So there is a national carer service network. There are some, I think there isn't, and well, there's Carers UK where they try and patch up carers, and there's online stuff. But the thing is, we go back to there's online stuff, but there isn't necessarily, you know, not everyone's online. So you know, you can't be national, you know what I mean? So there is a role for in-person carer services, because not everybody, you know, a lot of carers are elderly. In my borough, you know, there's poverty, they can't afford internet, couldn't afford a smart device. Do you know what I mean? So they need, you know what I mean? They need to be able to come into a physical centre to be able to get what they need, because, do you know what I mean? So it's patchy. So this is why I always say carer services or what's aimed at carers is not a level playing field, not in the slightest.
Thank you.
Just quickly say, so my mum had a stroke and overnight we became a carer. There are large numbers of people, we're talking about care here and it over a certain amount of time. There are large numbers of these carers who become carers overnight or within a second and a minute, and they're not given a choice, that it's a closed choice.
Yeah.
And And so we do talk about this kind of, you know, we can debate whether we want to give somebody that opportunity to say yes and no and boundaries and what have you. A lot of the time we're in hospitals or we're in an ambulance or, you know, we're in these settings where we're not given a choice as to what's going to happen to our loved one. We're going to have to look after them. So care is very nuanced and it's very broad. And so I just wanted to say that just so that we didn't think that we're caring for people gradually. We are, but sometimes we're literally stepping into it the next second.
In our care centre, a lot of care, they use this sentence quite a lot. So they basically say you're basically one incident away from being either a carer or a cared for. That's it. You know what I mean? And a lot of our carers say, when I left school, I never set out to be a carer. That wasn't on my CV. You know what I mean? So yeah.
I think with what the lady said earlier about maybe let's start with education. Maybe let's start with infomercial videos that kind of make it okay. Because at the minute it's not looked at that from my point of view. It's not looked at as being, oh yeah, when I get to 40 or 30, I'm gonna be a carer. So I think I'm gonna change the words there. I'm gonna call us carologists.
Drink related care by the time.
Okay, that's brilliant. Now we've got a word for the new movement that we're deciding. That's great.
Carologies, that's what you're doing, and then you're carologist.
Yeah, so thank you so much. I want to thank the panel and the audience as well for a really, really wonderful conversation. And I'm left feeling probably more optimistic than less optimistic, which is the program discussion. And I feel that there's so much that this space of care is opening up as an issue for everybody. And probably I'm going to go home. I don't know how other people. I'm going to go home now and draw one of those care maps. Yeah, that's the first way to raise our consciousness. So
I kind of call that you have the care map to see how much you care. Then you take a deep breath and go, right, family, let's come to this. We need to sort of circle.
Yes, yes. So thank you very much.